an excuse. So if anybody's interested in coming over and hanging Christmas lights, you're more than welcome to come over to our place and hang those lights for us here. Okay, so today we're going to talk about baby announcements. In the Bible, God used to use messengers whenever he was going to do an announcement. And of course, in this case, he used a heavenly messenger, which we're going to learn about today. So in the past, we had heavenly messenger. Today we have Facebook Messenger. Okay, so before we get started, I want to show you some announcements and how people are doing announcements of babies today. I did some research and came across a couple really cool ones. So let's look at baby announcements today. That's my favorite one over there. Isn't that cool? The paper clips. Baby loading 50%. Of course, player 2, pressing start October 2014. Just some cool ways to do baby announcements. But God had different ways to do baby announcements in the past. And we're going to learn about that today in the book of Luke, which we just mentioned. And for Jim, no, that is not the book of Luke we're talking about. Is he anywhere? Where'd he go? Where'd he run off to? There he is, way in the back over there. Turn your head around the corner so you can see the book of Luke we're not talking about. There it is, waving the hand. Okay. So no, we're talking about Luke, and we're talking about the man Luke. And a couple things you need to know about Luke before we get into the message today. First of all, Luke was not an apostle. He wasn't one of Christ's original apostles. He was a traveling companion of Paul, and he was a Gentile. He wasn't a Jew. So he was not versed in the Old Testament like the original apostles were. He was, however, a physician. He was a doctor. This was a man who had a very structured mind. He thought about things in a very structured way. So when he wrote his papers, he did so in a very structured way. Made it easier for people to understand. So, did you guys know that over 50% of Luke's gospel is unique? It contains materials that is not found elsewhere in the other gospels. Without Luke, we would not have information on certain periods of Christ's life. We just wouldn't know about it. He had a greater focus on individuals than the other gospels did. So Matthew, Mark, and John. So let's take a look at his precise writing style. So if you all want to open up your Bible for me, you can either flip, like I'm going to do, or you can click, or however you want to get to Luke 1. I want to start there with you. Of course, I have to find it now since I just lost the spot. All right. Yeah, Luke. All right. All right, so Luke 1. If you guys are there, just let me know you're there with me. All right, so Luke 1. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of these things, accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. So here Luke's talking at the beginning, as much as many have undertaken to compile an account of these things. It means Luke's not the only writer. We know this because there are other writers of the Bible. We have Matthew, Mark, John, and there's, of course, other writers. We have Paul, there were the Pauline epistles. So Luke's letting us know that, and I'm not the only person who's writing about these events, but I'm going to write them down in a different way. Handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses. He's talking about the apostles. These are the people who were witnesses to Christ, who were with him while he was alive on earth. He's also letting us know that, he wasn't there. So this is a second-hand account from Luke, but he's also letting us know that he's going to write this down for us. And servants of the Lord, it seemed fitting to me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out to you in consecutive order. And this is where we get the knowledge that Luke wanted to put this together in a way that was simple for people to understand, easy to understand, and specifically easy for the person who he's writing this to. So, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you're being taught. Now, we don't know who Theophilus is. It could have been a person, but we know that he was most excellent. So, using that phrase, most excellent, we can say that he was probably a governor or somebody of importance and high standing with the Roman Empire. So that's where he uses the most excellent Theophilus. So they want to investigate it carefully from the beginning so that we knew. So let's take a little closer look at the story then as we dig into this. We're going to go to Luke 1:5. In the days of Herod, king of Judah, there was a priest named Zacharias. And that's where we got our son's name, by the way. Zach. Got from Zacharias. Yeah, it's a little Zachary who's back in the back somewhere. A division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all commandments and requirements of the Lord. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. So who is Herod? Who's this Herod? Well, hang on a second. Who is this Herod we're talking about? King of Judea here. Okay. Herod was the same Herod we learn about in other Gospels. This is the Herod who had all of the babies killed in Bethlehem to try and prevent Jesus from coming to power as the king of the Jews. So this is a bad guy. You know what? Herod did a bunch of other things as well. He built a temple, Herod's temple. So let's take a look. Who is this Herod guy? That's Herod. Now, of course, that's from a recent movie. That's probably not what he looked like. But he was known as Herod the Great. He was a Roman client king of Judea, and he's known for colossal building projects throughout Judea, including the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Vital details of his life are recorded both in the Gospel of Matthew as well as in other writings from Jewish historians like Josephus. So we have a really good account of who Herod was. So why did Luke include this in here? Why did he want us to know about Herod at the time? Well, he's trying to place us in a time frame that people of that era would know. And so he's placing this in reality, in a real world, so we know who Herod was. In the rest of the verse, we're introduced to Zacharias and Elizabeth, and we're told somewhat about their genealogical past. We know where Elizabeth came from, her family. And keep in mind, the Jewish people of that time frame would, it was kind of a badge of honor, what your heritage was. So they wanted to write that down. But we learn the most important thing we need to know about Zacharias from Luke 1:6. And they were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. These were very devout people of Judaism. Zacharias was a priest, and Elizabeth was very devout as well. So why is that important? Why do we need to know that? Because we're about to find out that God is going to use them for something very extraordinary. And we're also going to find out they were without child for a long period of time. And in that culture, as is in our culture today in some areas, women who don't have children are seen as having something wrong with them. They're seen as maybe there was sin in their life. And there were other examples in the Bible where this happened as well. The blind man that Jesus, when he was talking to his apostles, and they assumed that he was blind because of something he had done. They assumed he was blind because of some sin in either his life or sin in his family's life. In reality, the reason the man was blind was because God wanted to use that to show his glory through Jesus when he healed him. So sometimes things happen in people's lives specifically because God is planning on using them for his glory. And in this case, the reason she was barren for so long was because God was planning on using her for the birth of a very, very special person who we're going to learn about today. But like I said, Luke wanted to point out they lived a blameless life before God, and that's very important for us. All right. This also brought up another point for me as well. I realized that they used Elizabeth very late in her life. Zachariah and Elizabeth were very old at this time, probably well beyond childbearing years. So we go through our life and we think to ourselves, well, I'm not young anymore, I'm not going to really have any impact. What impact can I have for God? Well, you know what? God can use you. It doesn't matter what your age is. God can use you to bring glory to him. This also scared me as well because I've got 4 kids already, and I assume that I'm not going to have any more. And my wife keeps telling me I need to go get fixed. And I keep telling her I need to go get broken because everything works at the problem. But God could use us well into our old age to still have children and use that for his glory. And of course, Nikki's over there shaking her head saying, that is not going to happen. But so don't sell yourself short as you get older in life. God can use you and will use you for extraordinary things. Okay? So let's go on a little further and let's see how this whole story develops out. We're in Luke 1:8-9. Now it happened that while he was performing his priestly service before God, in the appointed order of his division, according to the customs of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Now I've got a diagram up here of what the temple looked like. And okay, that is the altar of incense, and it's actually right here. It's supposed to be over there. I'm not sure why it shifted, but you kind of see what it looked like. This is the temple, and this is where it's laid out. This is the Holy of Holies. This is where the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, and everything is. This is that veil that's often talked about that was torn when Jesus was crucified on the cross and he died. That veil was finally torn, and that's allowing us to finally be with God. So there's the veil right there. And what would happen is the priest would go in and he would burn incense. So, put this right here. At that time frame, it's not like our church here. Okay, we have Pastor Jim in the back, we have Pastor Jay, and you've got me. So there's 3 of us here, right? At the time, and he, like I said, he was going, doing his priestly service and in his appointed order or division. There was roughly 85,000 priests at that time frame. Okay, that's a high range. It could have been 12 to 15,000, but the point is they were divided in 24 divisions. Each division served in the temple twice a year. So if you take that low number, say you take that 12,000 number, okay, that means there would have been 500 priests on duty that day, Zechariah being one of them. So Luke is trying to let us know that, you know what, God specifically picked Zechariah to go into the temple that day to perform his priestly duty. So, and they did so by lot. We learned that up top there. He was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. So what does that look like? What does that look like when he goes in to burn incense? Well, it wasn't just him going in. Keep in mind, the priests go in every day, and they burn incense to the Lord, and that incense is the prayers that would rise up for the people of Israel to God. So if there was a priest in there the day before and he had burned incense, that means somebody has to go in and pull those ashes out of the area where they burn the incense, right? So that one priest would go in first. He would go in, he would take the ashes out, and he would pull those, he would pray, he would take the ashes out, and he would go. Well, you have to burn incense, right? So you need something hot to burn the incense on. So they would take, the next priest would go in, he would take the coals in. He would put the coals inside of that area right there where they burn the ashes. And then he would pray, and he himself would turn around, and he would go back outside. And then it fell to Zechariah. His job was to go in and burn incense. So he would take the incense in with him. He would take the incense, he'd put it on top of the altar. He would pray, and those prayers would be for Israel. Those prayers would be for, his family. And probably one of those prayers was for children. Okay? And we know Zechariah's been praying a while for a child. So he would go in, he would pray, and he would offer those prayers up to God. And of course that incense would fill the room, and the people outside would see that smoke, and they would know that prayers were going on at the time, at the appointed time. And we learned that from at the top as well, where it says, the point of the time to do that. All right. So after that, the doors would be shut, and blasts of sound would be sent out across. Everyone know it would be time to pray. So there's Zechariah. He's in the temple. He puts the incense in the burner, and it starts to smoke, and he offered his prayers. And as soon as he finishes prayers, what happens? An angel appears. And we learn this in Luke 1:10-12. And the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of incense burning. We mentioned before they'd have that loud blast. People would be outside praying. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the altar of incense. Zacharias was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. So there's a lot going on in this passage. Let's break this out a little bit as well. We often hear stories about people who have encountered angels. Jim gave a great sermon earlier in the year on angels. And we often see the angels surrounded in light. People see them as their friends. They have long conversations with them. They have stories about them. But you know what? That's not what the Bible shows angels to be. Whenever someone encounters an angel in the Bible, the first thing they do is usually they have fear and trembling. And they drop to their knees. In some situations, they even try to pray to the angel, who usually looks down and says, "No, stand up. You don't worship me. You don't pray to me. You pray to God." Okay? So this is what happens. So Zacharias is in the temple, and he's probably facing, my guess is he's probably facing the lampstand, because the angel appeared to the right, probably in this area right here. That's important because he wasn't blocking his exit. Zacharias could have left, but he chose not to. He chose to stay there and talk to the angel. It's not really for me to judge, like I said, what happens when people meet angels, but everything I've read in the Bible says that you would have fear and trembling, and this is exactly what he experienced. And we read a little further along that the angel talks to him. And in Luke 1:13a, it says, "But the angel said to him, 'Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard.'" What petition was that? What do you think he was asking for? Well, he was asking for he was asking for a child. He's been praying and praying and praying and praying and asking for a child. But we're going to find out a little further down that he probably stopped praying a long time ago. He gave up faith. He was still there. He was still a priest, but he probably gave up on ever having a child. So what does the angel say to him? The angel says, Gabriel says that he does not have to be afraid of him, and that his prayers have been heard. But what have they been praying for? Well, obviously I said a child. He probably thought that his prayers, like I said, had been ignored. But the angel tells him his prayers have been heard. So you can know that as well. You can know that when you pray, God does hear your prayers. Okay? God knows what you're praying for. And a little later on, we're going to find out that he doesn't always answer those prayers immediately. Sometimes he does. We learned this morning in Genesis. We were talking about when Abraham was getting old. He wanted to find a wife for his son. So he sent off a servant to go to a well to find a specific woman. And when he prayed, immediately after he prayed, the woman was standing there. So sometimes God answers prayers immediately. Other times God takes his time. I've got a perfect example in my own life of when God answered prayer immediately. Mr. Reed sitting in the back doesn't know about this. And that's the guy turning his head around. No, not your dad, you. I had a problem with my car. And it wasn't working, and Mike said he was going to help me with it. So I took it over to his house, and we worked on it. Well, okay, honestly, he worked on it. I held the flashlight. I did use the wrench occasionally. The point is, when we got done, we started the car up, and sure enough, it didn't work. It wasn't working properly. So I drove home, and on the way home, I prayed to God. I said, God, I really need this car to work. I needed to go back and forth to work. If you can please see fit to just help us figure out what's wrong with this car, I would really, really appreciate it. Less than an hour later, I got a call from Mike. Hey, guess what? I fixed it. It's working. So God answered that prayer immediately. However, I've also been praying for a building for a church. I've been praying for a worship leader. We've been praying for that for months. I think we've been praying for that for years at the church. And God has not seen fit to deliver that yet. He'll do so in his time when it brings glory to him. So, why did God wait so long to answer the prayer of Zacharias to Elizabeth? Because he was waiting for his time. He's waiting for that moment where it would bring glory to him. So let's read a little bit further down. Like I said, this is where the baby announcement comes in, hence the announcement we're talking about. There's Zacharias. We talked about that. All right, so Luke 1:13 through 17. And your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. Now, nobody else in this family had the name John. There was no history in the family of the name John. So this is kind of unique. He's going to name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor. This is a callback to the Nazarene oath that some people would take. Samson took the Nazarene oath, where he'd drink no wine, no liquor, and he also wouldn't cut his hair. Now, Luke doesn't go into talking about cutting the hair here. It may be that he was never asked to do that, or it could be that Luke didn't want to weigh down, since he was a Gentile, he didn't want to weigh down his readers with all the specifics of Judaism. But we go on to say, he will be great in the sight of the Lord, he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah. And this is why we're talking about this particular section of the Bible now. This is the forerunner, of course, being John, being the person who goes before Jesus. He's the one who makes the way straight and narrow for Jesus, the coming of Jesus. He's the one who proclaims his name out in the wilderness. That's why we're talking about this announcement. John is going to become a very important figure in Christ's ministry, announcing who he is. So bring many sons back to the Lord God, and he will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteousness, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So there's a lot going on in that statement as well. Let's break that down a little bit further also. We talked about this already. We know why God waited so long to answer their prayer. Because he had something better in mind for them. He had something better in store for Elizabeth and Zechariah. Like I said, he's going to bring them a son, but not just any son, a very specific son. He's going to bring them John the Baptist, who is Elijah again. Jesus said that he was the greatest person to be born to a woman up to that time. So it's pretty cool if you think about it. They've been praying and praying and praying. They probably stopped praying at some point. And because we'll find out in a second why I think he stopped praying. But God had a plan all along. He had a plan to bring them a very important child. It wasn't because of their sinning why he didn't do it. It wasn't because they were bad people. It wasn't because they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. It's because, like I said, God had much greater purpose in mind for them. And Gabriel quotes this. He quotes from Malachi, and that was what our reading was earlier today, which is Malachi 4:6. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. So 450 years prior, God made a promise, and now God is following through on that promise. How long did Zacharias and Elizabeth wait for a child? 20 years, 30 years, 4 years? That's nothing compared to how long the world had been waiting for the birth of this child. And we'll see in a minute that, Jay mentioned, he goes, well, it's not very fair what happened to Zacharias. He doubted God. He doubted what the angel said, but so did Mary, and Mary didn't get punished for it. What's up with that? Well, if you think about it, Mary was a young girl. She wasn't schooled like Zacharias would have been. She wasn't knowledgeable of the Bible like Zacharias would have been. He knew that God used people for these specific purposes. As a matter of fact, they were often on the lookout for families that gave birth much later in life because they knew, for example, Abraham and Sarah, another story we've been talking about earlier, like I mentioned. They had children much later in life. When they had Isaac, he was over 100 years old at the time. So they were on the lookout for this type of event. So he should have known better. But we find out in a second that he doubted God, and he doubted what he should have known. Okay, so let's see how I know that Zacharias had given up on praying and where the doubt comes in. Luke 1:18. Zacharias said to the angel, how will I know for certain? For I'm an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. Okay? The first thing that Zacharias should have said when he said you're going to have a son was, guess what, everybody? I'm having a kid. I'm having a son. Hey, priest, I'm having a son. Hey, I'm having a son. No, he didn't do that. The first thing out of his mouth is, after God finally answers his prayers, is, how do you know for certain I'm going to have one? I'm really old. So not only does he doubt God, not only does he doubt the angel, he goes on to give him a lesson on human anatomy. Really? Okay, so I know you've been praying for a child for a long time, so this is why I know he's probably doubted it. Well, how do you know? There's no way. Zacharias should have known that God can do whatever he needs to do at any point in his life. Like I said, he should have said, wow, an answer to my prayer, but he doesn't do that. Is that where you're at today with some of your prayers? Have you been praying for a long time for something, and it just hasn't come to fruition yet? Have you been praying for a child and you haven't received one yet? You've been praying for health, hasn't happened yet? Maybe you've stopped praying. Maybe you've stopped believing. But I want to say, just like Gabriel said, God has heard your prayer and he will answer your prayers in his time. Even if you stop praying, even if you stop believing, we read in 2 Timothy 2:13, if we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. God will always be faithful. God will always be there. He will always listen to your prayers. God may have something better in mind for you. He may not be doing this because of sin in your life. He may be doing it because he wants to glorify himself through you when your prayers are finally answered. But do me a favor, will you? When God finally does answer that prayer, don't doubt him. Just say thank you. Have joy in your heart. Be joyful for it. And let everybody know. And that's why God is using you, and that's why it took so long. He's using you to let people know who he is. All right, so what happens from this point on? What does the angel do, and what does God do? So Luke 1:19-20, the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel. Okay, there you are there. I'm Gabriel. Say it, Gabriel. Say it for me.
I am Gabriel.
Thank you. Good job, Gabriel. Your typecast is Gabriel from this point forward. Who stands in the presence of God. And I have been sent to speak to you and bring you this good news. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their proper time. So what happens here? Gabriel does Elizabeth a solid. Your husband's not going to be able to talk until that baby's born. Woo! So, doubting God is always, okay, I'm going to say it, it's a dumb thing to do. Don't doubt God. We see in verses that Zacharias doubted, and God makes him dumb, unable to speak. Another word for it. He became unable to speak. So what happens next? Luke 1:21-22. The people were waiting for Zacharias and wondering at his delay in the temple. See, like I said, he was supposed to go in. He was supposed to offer the incense, offer the prayers, and just like the other priests, get up and leave. Maybe they thought something happened to him. Maybe they thought he had an issue. But the problem is he was late coming back out of the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them. And they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple, and he kept making signs to them and remained mute. I am convinced this was the first game of charades. It probably went something like this. Zacharias, what's going on? Two words. Baby chicken. No! But he came out, he wasn't able to speak. So he was trying to let them know what happened. He probably didn't have anything to write with, so he was just signing to them. So we continue on Luke 1:23. When the days of his priestly service were ended, about a week, he went back home. So God had accomplished his purpose. He had let Zacharias know that he was going to have a child, but not just any child, a child that was going to be important before God and become that messenger for Jesus when he came. A man who was going to come back with the power of Elijah to accomplish his purposes. Luke 1:24-25. After these days, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant. And she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, This is the way of the Lord. This is the way the Lord has dealt with me in these days, when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men. God always keeps his promises. He kept his promise to Israel. Kept his promise to Zechariah, and like I said, he will keep his promise to you. Elizabeth talks about taking away her disgrace among men. Luke 1:25, that God took away her reproach. God removed her shame of barrenness. One of the greatest promises in the Bible God has given each one of us is like that of Elizabeth. He will take away our reproach, our greatest shame, and that in our case is our sin. And he does so through Jesus. And that's how God takes away our reproach. Colossians 1:21-22. I'll do a side note of this one. And you who once were alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet know he has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death, to present you holy and blameless, and above reproach in his sight. It said our greatest reproach is our shame, is our sin. And God has promised that due to the death and resurrection of his Son on the cross, our sin, our reproach, much like Elizabeth's reproach, can be taken away from us. So, a couple things you can take away from this. One, like I said, God answers prayers. But God answers prayers in his time, on his terms. But that doesn't mean we get to stop praying to God, does it? No. It doesn't mean we get to stop asking for things. Continue to do so. God will continue to use you for his glory. And he'll do so in his time. And it can happen at any time in your life. Got a slide in for that, actually. God will use ordinary people for extraordinary things. We saw this with Abraham in Genesis. We see this with Zechariah here. These are just ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. He had a job. He probably had a job back in his hometown because the position of the priest wasn't a full-time position. He only went twice a year with his group. So the rest of the time he had a job. So he's just an ordinary guy living an ordinary life, in a small town with his wife asking for a child. And God decided to use him for great things. So don't sell yourself short. Don't sell God short. Keep praying, keep asking for those things. And remember, God will use you for his glory. All right, so let's go and close out in prayer. And just so you guys know,